They say the desert holds secrets, things that whisper in the wind and wait in the shadows, watching. Some believe it's just the sound of the wind playing tricks, while others know better. They'll tell you not to answer if you hear your name carried on the breeze, not to listen to the faint whistle outside at night. It's the kind of thing parents tell their children to keep them from wandering too far. But some stories have roots in truth. I learned that the hard way. I grew up in rural Appalachia, so I grew up hearing all kinds of superstitions and legends about ghosts and other creepy things. Of course, as an adult, I realized they were mostly made up by people trying to scare their kids into staying close to home and out of the woods. And these stories were passed down over generations, like old family heirlooms of fear. I was always told never to respond if something called my name from the woods, and that if we ever heard whistling outside at night, it meant the devil was close. Of course, there was real truth and valuable advice buried in some of those stories. If a stranger's calling your name in the woods or whistling outside your house at night, you probably should be afraid, especially as a child. But those were just stories to me, until I encountered something that shook that belief to its core. I never experienced anything like that in the mountains growing up. The scariest thing to ever happen to me wasn't supernatural, no. It was far more mundane and terrifying. And it happened in New Mexico. My parents had passed away when I was very young, leaving me with only distant memories of family life. When I was old enough, I set off to build my own life and find peace. Far from what I knew, a piece of land came my way, an empty, dusty stretch of earth, just a few acres removed from civilization. It was surrounded by forgotten pathways and scrub brush, and it was exactly the kind of place people like me could find a fresh start. Quiet, remote, and isolated. I purchased the lot, paired it with a modest, well-used camper, and with nothing but ambition and hope, set out to build a new life in solitude. I didn't mind the isolation. It was a reprieve. I could hear the wind whistling through the dry trees and feel the full silence of the desert stretching into infinity. I lived there alone most nights, with nothing but the sound of my dog breathing and the desert wind sweeping across the sand. The nights were long in that camper, and the stillness would often make me jump at the sound of the wind shifting or distant birds screeching into the unknown. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar groans of the camper as it swayed against the wind, always trying to find a kind of peace in the sound. But that night, it felt as though something had come from the very depths of the earth. It came without warning, a sound sharp and deliberate, breaking through the silence like a blade through the veil. A whistling, faint at first, then louder with an unnatural cadence. The kind of sound that grips you, sinking into your bones, before you can even think about moving. It felt cold, wrong, out of place. It was the kind of sound that makes you immediately doubt your own sanity. I froze in bed, heart pounding, listening, unable to move. My body was leaden, my breath stuck in my chest. The sound came again, closer this time, and I could feel it. It was there. The darkness felt alive, clawing and scraping at the edges of the camper. My dog, a giant protective beast with a growl that could shake a mountain, was up in an instant. His low growl was a sound of pure warning, sharp and deep, vibrating through the air like a living thing. He stood at attention, staring towards the entrance with his ears flat against his head, his whole body trembling with tension. He was looking at something. Something. And that's when I knew this was no simple trick of the wind. I told myself it was nothing, Perhaps a wild animal, maybe a trick of the imagination, but the sound was unmistakable. A deliberate, rhythmic whistle that felt like it was trying to lure me, pulling me from the safe space of the blankets and into the blackness. Zeus, my massive, loyal dog, was having none of it. His growl intensified, deepened, becoming a snarl that sounded like a threat to whoever might be out there. I could feel the air in the camper shift, as if something were pressing against the metal itself, trying to get through. My body refused to obey my thoughts, my hands trembled, and I could not summon the strength to look. The sound came again, sharper this time, and I felt the vibrations in my bones. Zeus growled louder, pacing like a soldier ready for a fight. His whole body coiled like a spring. His barking, when it came, felt like a sudden break from the tension, sharp and raw. It split the air and felt like an answer to whatever presence was lurking just outside. But nothing came in response. The sound fell still for a moment, and the air felt heavier, more suffocating, charged with unseen malice. I couldn't bring myself to move. I was certain that if I stepped outside, I would see something. My breath came in shallow, shaky gasps, and I clenched the blankets tighter. The sound lingered. I could feel it scraping at me from every direction. My dog stared intently at the spot where the sound come from, muscles rippling, his growls reduced to low, mournful murmurs. I could sense his fear, his unease, as though he were trying to protect me from a force I couldn't comprehend. Somehow, I convinced myself that I could wait it out, that it would go away, that if I ignored it, it would vanish into the dark desert wind. I stayed in bed for hours, unable to sleep, unable to stop the cold sensation of fear crawling into my throat. My fingers clutched at the blankets, my whole body shaking, every sound outside now carrying the weight of dread. Eventually, my dog grew quiet again, reluctantly, but I couldn't convince myself it was over. I knew what I had felt. I knew what I had heard. It stayed with me, lingering as though it were sounding alive, still out there, still watching, still listening. I never saw it. I never found footprints or clues the next morning when I looked. It might have been nothing, a figment of my imagination, a trick played by the wind on my own anxiety, but I never felt safe again in that camper. The sound haunted me for months. Every whistle became a sound from that night. Every gust of wind felt like fingers clawing at the door. Sometimes when I would sit out at night under the stars, I'd hear something in the distance. A faint whistle carried on the wind, and I'd stop breathing, waiting, hoping it wasn't real, but it always felt real, as though the presence in the dark had followed me, watched me, studied me from the shadows. I never could shake that feeling. On that night, something came for me, and that it would always be out there. The wind still whispers through the scrub brush. The stars still watch the earth from above, and the sound is still there too. A soft, deliberate whistle, just out of sight, just far enough away to leave me afraid. It never goes away. If you enjoyed this story and felt the chill in the air, don't forget to hit that like button and let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Have you ever experienced something strange in the dark? Share your stories. I'd love to hear them. And if you want more tales that keep you up at night, subscribe and join the journey. Stay safe out there. You never know who might be listening.